Hi, I'm Dennis Phillips, and welcome to Everyday Reloading and Shooting. All right, so the load that we're going to be working on this time out is for 6.5 Creedmoor, a 140 grain ELD match bullet with alpha one-time fired brass using Federal Gold Medal AR match primers. The load came from Gavin Tube, and there's a link to his video in the description below. And in that video, he does a 10-shot load development test for this particular bullet, and he uses a chronograph, and he measures the nodes where the velocity flattens out, where you change the powder, but the velocity doesn't change much, which is good because that gives you a very consistent load, especially if you're shooting at long distances. But the nodes that I'm going to be developing here are 39.3, 39.5, 39.9, 40.3, and 40.7, because those particular nodes seem to be where there was the flattest trajectory in the velocity. And I've calculated those velocities based on his chart to be 2575 to 2640 feet per second for those 5. So I'm going to load 10 shots of each of these. I'm going to shoot 2 targets for each. I'm going to average the group sizes, and I'm going to average those 2 targets for each load together, and we're going to see how those perform. The 40.3 load has performed well for me before when I was shooting the 140 ELD match, and the 40.7 worked really well for Sierra Match King 140 grain bullets. So we're going to load these up, and we're going to test them and see how they do. Okay, so we have these all charged with powder, and we do a visual inspection to make sure that there's powder in every case, and there is. So now it's time to seat the bullets. So to seat the bullets, I'm going to install the RCBS bullet seating die. Probably has already been adjusted somewhat, but I'm going to back off of the adjustment screw just a little bit before I start seating. I'll have to loosen that. There we go. And I will be seating these at the recommended length of 2.80 inches. So we'll need our caliper. Turn that on. I'm going to lay out a cloth. We'll spread the bullets out here. I'll turn them to make it easier to pick up. That may not be quite 50, but we can always put a few more down here. Insert the case into the shell holder. Insert. We'll check. 2.829, so it's a little long. So we've got to bring that down just a little. .802, 2.801. There we go. 2.80. So we're going to seat the rest of these, and then we'll be ready to take them to the range and test them out. So we have 50 little soldiers ready to march off into battle, but I've measured each one of these, and we have overall lengths between 2.97 and 2.80 inches. So we shall test them and see how they perform. Okay, so here I'm going to be following Ultimate Reloader's 10-shot load development. I'm going to be shooting loads from 39.3 to 40.7. I'm all set up down there at the far end. I'll be shooting 2 groups of 5 at each powder charge. So let's get going and see how they do. That was a hard bolt lift, and I've definitely got ejector marks on the round. And that was at 39.3. Again, hard lift with ejector marks. All right, some of these suits really well, so let's bring them in and take a look. Okay, so this was the cold bore shot here. Here I had one flyer and the rest of these in one hole. That's a pretty tight group. This is an extremely tight group. This is a really tight group. And this is a really tight group. But we're going to go home, we're going to measure them, analyze them, and go from there. but the next step will be to work with the seating depth on these. This is the brass from my first 10 rounds. There were two groups at 39.3 grains of powder, which was my lowest charge of the day. Oddly, the first 5 bolt lifts were extremely hard, and I found markings on 3 cases. It's a little hard to see on the first one here on the left, but on the word Creedmoor starting at the C, there's like a teardrop shape there. It's a little bit darker. You can see where it comes out underneath the double E's. On this middle shelf, on this middle casing, you can see the number 6.5. That's actually shinier right there. So that's been compressed inside of the rifle chamber. And then right before the word alpha on this case, there's also a slight embellishment on the case, a shiny spot where it was pushed back against the bolt. The first 5, the rest of these, those 3 I see markings, but the rest of these all look fine in terms of the primers not flattening, no signs of pressure on the case. That's just an anomaly, I suppose, because after the first 5 rounds, which had a hard bolt lift and they were hard to eject, the rest of them shot fine. In fact, the rest of all of these rounds for the entire target, even at the higher charge weights, all shot fine, and I never saw any pressure signs. So I have no idea what was causing that. I cleaned the rifle before I went out. I made sure I had a light coat of oil on the barrel and the bolt and all the parts, and removed excess oil. So anyway, just no clue on that. So looking at the groups, we're going to measure these. So to get a good reading on the front side when we measure, we want to press all of these down on the back side. Flatten those protrusions in the paper back down. I've showed you this before, but when you flatten them down like that, you can see a nice gray ring, and that gray ring is the diameter of the bullet, and that's where you're going to measure from. These were not flattened down. You can see where the hole is, but you're not going to get as good a measurement off of these as you will with that gray ring showing to measure from. I think it's interesting to examine the target from the back side. This, of course, was my cold barrel shot. These first 2 groups, those were at the lowest powder charge, and there was a fairly large spread there. Then as we increased the powder charge, the groups got tighter. Thing is, this is the first group, and this is the second group. First, second, first, second, first, second. And it's interesting to me that you can shoot a tight group first, and then with the same charge, you shoot a group that's not quite as tight. Well, I guess it kind of is close, except for this flyer. If you take that out of the equation, those groups look pretty similar. Same here, I suppose. Tight 5 out of 5 here. Larger spread here. And this was the last group of the day. Shot extremely tight first time, first group. Second group, a little more open. So let's measure them and take a look. The first group was the most spread out. The first group was 39.3 grains of H4350. Again, we're shooting a 140 grain ELD Hornady match bullet at 100 yards with a Socko S26.5 Creedmoor. The first group is the coal barrel group, and this is the most spread out, at an extreme spread of 1.07 inches. I also measure the best 4 out of 5, which is 0.72 inches. I average those together for a score of 0.90. The second group at the same powder charge shot very similarly. We had an extreme spread of 1.03, a best 4 out of 5 at 0.79, and a score of 91. So those were very similar. Group 2 began to tighten up. We're at 39.5 grains of powder here. Our extreme spread was 0.87. And look at this. We've got 4 bullets clustered together here in basically one single hole, measuring 0.16 inches, which brings that score down to 0.52. The second group of that same powder charge, we had an extreme spread of 0.79 and the best 4 out of 5 at 0.51, giving us a score of 0.65 inches. Also, note that this is the point where I'm aiming, the bottom of the circle. They say aim small, shoot small, so I'm aiming for the bottom of that circle. So if these bullets seem to be shooting low, just below the bullseye, that's exactly where I'm aiming. Group 3, we're at 39.9 grains of powder. We had an extreme spread on the first target of 0.57 inches, best 4 out of 5 at 0.46 with a score of 52. On the second group, that was a little more spread out. We had a maximum spread of 0.84 inches, best 4 out of 5 at 6.8, so with a score of 76. This was a great group here at 40.3 grains of powder. That one has been good for this particular bullet. Didn't shoot so well on the second group, but on the first group at that charge weight, I had a maximum spread of 0.66 inches and a best 4 out of 5 at 0.50 inches and a score of 58. On the second group, for whatever reason, I had a flyer here. We'll call that shooter error, which gave me an extreme spread of 1.26 inches. So that was, it looks like my worst group of the day, and a best 4 out of 5 at 0.75 with a score just over an inch. The last group that I shot was at 40.7 grains of powder. This one shot very well. All of these were touching. We had an overall group size of 0.51 inches with the best 4 out of 5 at 0.39 and a score of 45. That last group was a little more spread out, but we had an extreme spread of 0.84 inches. Best 4 out of 5 was 0.49. Not sure which one of these had 2 bullet holes, but one of these had 2 bullets pass through the same hole, because I know I shot 5, unless I missed the target altogether, which I don't think would happen. But we've got a score of 0.67. So how do these average out overall? Okay, at 39.3 grains, the 2 targets averaged an extreme spread of 1.05. The best 4 out of 5 was 0.76 and a score of 91. That, of course, is my highest score of the day, which it means the worst shooting. The second group at 39.5 grains, we averaged an extreme spread of 0.83 inches with the best 4 out of 5 because of this 0.16 here, 0.34, and a score of 0.59. The third group was at 39.9 grains of powder, and we had an average extreme spread of 0.71 inches, a best 4 out of 5 at 0.57, with a score of 0.64. At 40.3 grains, we had an extreme spread average of 0.96, best 4 out of 5 at 0.63, and a score of 0.80. This last group, even though this bottom group is a little spread out, actually turned out to be probably the best group of the day. So with those 2, we averaged 0.68 extreme spread. That's even with this one at 0.84. 0.68 extreme spread, best 4 out of 5 at 0.44, and a score of 5.6. So where I want to work my load development most likely is going to be in this range right here, in the 40.7 range here. We also had really good success over here at 39.5 grains of powder. I may have to experiment there some. but I'm probably going to focus my load development around this 40.7 grain load. And what we'll do there is we'll now work with that load and adjust the seeding depth on our bullets. All right, so there you have it. Those are my results of the day. I want to insert one final note here. These were my results that I just showed you, and I'm going to be developing the 40.7 grains with the 140 grain ELD match bullet and 40.7 grains of Hodgson's H4350. That was my best group of the day. But I have also loaded 140 grain Sierra Match Kings using that same load. So I think what I'm probably going to do before I start experimenting with seeding depth, I'm going to fire these next time out. These are loaded at the same charge weights as the Hornady Hornady ELD match. So we will shoot these, then compare, and then decide on which load to experiment with for the seeding depths. Okay? I really appreciate your watching. Thank you so very much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.